Here now is House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. Here has how she is firing back at the president for this move.
The president single-handedly decided to raise America's health premiums for no reason except spite and cruelty.
Republican Congressman Jason Lewis from Minnesota joins us now. Spite and cruelty. Was that the motive? Spite and cruelty against Americans.
This is rich, considering all the rules that came under the Affordable Care Act under Kathleen Sebelius. The law was what made it possible for the HHS secretary and the administration to impose many of those things. The president just is undoing part of it. But it's especially ironic hearing the minority leader talk about bailing out big insurance and more corporate subsidies to cover up a failed experiment. The Democratic solution here does nothing to control costs. They just want to make certain the massive subsidies continue to cover up their problem.
So a lot of the insurance companies have gotten out. And when you look at the past 2 quarters, you can see that the profits for the big 5 insurance companies were more than $10 billion. And maybe that's a function of the fact that they got out. Maybe that's a function of the fact that the ones that are in are getting a ton of money from the government. But it does tell you that we should not make the next payment if they did that well.
Well, that was the great lie. Yeah, that was a great lie of Obamacare, that you can force companies to lose money. No, they will leave the market. You now have, what, 40%, 50%? It could be as high as 60% of the counties in the country with one insurer. They are exiting the market. Premiums are skyrocketing. In my home state, Melissa, the state of Minnesota had to come in with $549 million to buy down premiums. Yeah. So why don't we have real reform, the kinds that the president is talking about today, short-term insurance for a year, undoing the mandates, equalizing the tax code, and associations across state lines for small business, which we voted on in the House, and I was glad to support.
One problem, though, in the short term is that a bunch of people are going to be stranded. That's not going to be great. How do you deal with that?
Well, you can keep putting on a Band-Aid, but the problem with this approach is you'd have to subsidize the exchanges, MNsure in my home state, forever. Every year you'd have to throw millions or billions of dollars at it. This is why we need real reform, and I think that's what the president is doing. The administration is trying to force the issue a little bit and say, look, it's time we get to actual reform that lowers costs so people can buy the kind of health insurance best suited to them and not the kind that some bureaucrat thinks they ought to have.
So my own Senator Chuck Schumer saying today that a whole lot of Republicans want to get these payments restored. That's what he's claiming. Is that true, do you think? Are there Republicans? Maybe.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe he ought to name some names. I have no idea who he's talking about. I think we ought to do real health care reform and fix this problem once and for all.
So what does that look like, though? Because, the fact of the matter, and everybody who can do math, we know that there's a bunch of people who are not healthy, who need a lot of coverage and can't pay for it. And they're not going to get thrown out into the street. How do we pay for those people the most efficient way possible? Because it seems like it is going to be up to the majority and to the healthy people to pay for this group that needs health care and they can't pay for it. How do we do that most efficiently?
Well, Obamacare priced everyone as though they were sick. So naturally the prices went up. High-risk pools can take care of the vulnerable, and they did so before the ACA, which basically eliminated them. My home state had a very successful high-risk pool that didn't cause prices for everybody else to go up. But that was undone with the Affordable Care Act, throwing everybody onto the exchanges.
We're out of time, but I got to ask you, how was that high-risk pool, how was that successful? I mean, did you lay off the risk in reinsurance markets? Because people say that math doesn't add up. You had one that worked. What made it work?
An invisible high-risk pool where the insurance companies can't game the system is what works. They don't know who's coming into their network and who's coming out, so they don't cherry-pick. And that was precisely what was in the American Health Care Act. And it was $138 billion worth of a safety net that would have allowed states to reimpose their high-risk pools and then allowed prices to fall for everybody else, especially the young and the healthy, who right now can't afford to come into the insurance market.